My name is Dr. Michel Aboutanos. I'm a trauma surgeon, and for over 25 years I've worked on the front lines of life and death at VCU Medical Center here in Virginia. In that time, I've repaired shattered bodies, reopened hearts that had no reason to beat again, and held hands that went cold in mine. But the case I'm about to tell you was unlike anything I've ever seen. It's about a man named Daniel Mercer, a patient whose death I pronounced with my own voice, and whose heartbeat I felt with my own hand hours later. The first thing I noticed was the cold dot, not the kind that wraps around you outside on a winter night, but the kind that seems to come from inside the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. A sterile, cold, dead and unmoving. The morgue at VCU Medical Center is always quiet, but that night the silence felt heavier, like it was waiting for something. It was raining outside. I could hear the thin, steady patter on the loading bay above. My shoes clicked against the linoleum as I stepped inside. I had been paged without much explanation, just a short, tense voice on the phone. "Doctor, you need to come down here." Now, a nurse was standing beside one of the steel tables, her hands clasped too tightly. I knew her well, calm under pressure, unshaken even in the worst trauma cases. But tonight, she looked like she had seen something she couldn't quite name. "There's something wrong," she said, and her voice caught on the last word. On the table was a body, male, middle-aged, pale skin under the harsh fluorescent light. A white sheet covered him up to his chest. I stepped forward and saw the tag at his ankle. Daniel Mercer. The man from the highway accident. The man whose chest I had opened, whose heart I had tried to coax back to life for nearly an hour before admitting defeat. I should have felt nothing but the clinical detachment that comes after so many years. In surgery, another case that ended the way so many do. But there was something in the air, something that made the small hairs on my arms stand up. The nurse didn't move as I reached for the sheet. She just kept her eyes on me, as if watching, to see how I would react. I pulled the cloth back. His face was waxy, lips parted slightly, a bruise spreading across his temple, and then I touched him. It was just a habit, pressing 2 fingers against the neck, even though I already knew the answer. But under my fingertips, a faint, stuttering rhythm. I froze. No, that was impossible. I pressed harder, finding the carotid, counting. In my head, 1, 2, pause. 1, it was there. Weak, irregular, but unmistakable. I looked at the nurse. "Get a gurney. We're moving him." She didn't move. Her face had gone pale, and she shook her head like she thought I was joking, or losing my mind. "Doctor, he's been here for 2 hours. I don't care now." The doors banged open as orderlies rushed in. The sound of metal on tile was deafening in the stillness. They wheeled him out, the sheets sliding halfway off his body. I walked beside them, my hands still on his neck, feeling for that fragile thread of life, as if letting go would make it vanish. In all my years, I'd never felt so completely unmoored from what I knew to be true. We had called his time of death. His vitals were 0. His heart had been silent for longer than anyone could survive. And yet there it was. That night, the boundaries between life and death blurred before my eyes. And what followed still keeps me awake. 3 hours before I stood in that morgue, before I felt that impossible heartbeat. The ER was chaos. Virginia's highways can be cruel. One mistake, one distraction, one stretch of black asphalt slicked with rain, and the world can tilt forever. That night, It tilted for more people than I could count. The call came in just after midnight. Multiple vehicles, severe entrapment, possible fatalities. The kind of message that makes the whole trauma team instinctively move faster, even before the first siren is heard. By the time the first ambulance backed into the bay, we were ready, or at least as ready as one can be. Daniel Mercer arrived on the second wave. They told me he'd been found crushed inside what was left of a silver sedan. No ID on him, no family, just a crumpled license plate and the clothes on his back. His skin was grey, breaths shallow, blood soaking through makeshift dressings. The paramedics' voices were tight with the sound of someone holding their breath between sentences. We worked fast. My hands moved the way they always do, precise, certain, even when my mind was running ahead to what we'd need to fix next. He had a collapsed lung, internal bleeding, multiple fractures. We opened his chest, suctioned blood, clamped arteries, replaced volume with saline and blood units as fast as they came. There's a strange kind of tunnel vision that happens in trauma. The rest of the world falls away. There's just you, the patient, and the fight. I've been there hundreds of times, but that night, I kept feeling something different. Something I didn't want to name. Like I was already losing him, no matter what I did. He coded once. We shocked him, brought him back. He coded again. My voice stayed calm, my commands sharp. We were running on the edge of possibility, but he kept slipping further. I remember watching the monitor, each flat line stretching longer, each return of a pulse weaker than the last. And I remember the moment I knew, not when the heart stopped, but when I felt the fight leave his body. There's a stillness that follows, a surrender. 45 minutes of resuscitation, 45 minutes of refusing to give up. And then, with a heaviness in my chest, I called it time of death, 126A.M. The room went quiet, except for the beeping of machines still attached to other patients. I stepped back, gloves heavy with blood. I didn't look at his face right away. It felt like looking would make it too personal, like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. When I finally did, there was something there I couldn't quite explain. Not peace, not pain, just unfinished, like a sentence cut off mid-word. I left the room, went to wash my hands. The water was warm, but it didn't feel like it reached my skin. I've lost patience before. You learn to carry it without breaking under the weight. But with him, there was a strange aftertaste in the air, as if the case wasn't over, though I'd already closed the book hours later. Standing in the morgue, my hand on his neck, that feeling would come back to me, and this time it wouldn't. Let go. The wheels of the gurney screamed against the hallway floor as we pushed him toward the operating room. My hand never left his neck. I was terrified that if I let go, I'd lose that fragile rhythm all over again. Inside the OR, the overhead lights burned white against his ashen skin. His pupils were fixed. That alone should have been enough for me to accept that this was a body, not a patient. By every clinical standard, Daniel should have been beyond the reach of my hands, beyond the reach of science. His brain should have been gone, yet the monitor told a different story. A faint, stubborn heartbeat, trying to climb its way back from the edge. The team was silent, moving only because I told them to. I could feel the weight of their stares, disbelief, unease, even fear. In their eyes, I wasn't just trying to save a man. I was doing something that shouldn't be possible. We opened his chest again. Blood pooled under the harsh light. It smelled sharp in the air. My instruments felt heavier than they should. Each movement was exact, But somewhere in my mind, I was wrestling with questions that had no place in an operating room. Why was his heart strengthening? Where had that first spark come from? And the question I couldn't speak aloud: had I been wrong when I pronounced him dead? As I clamped a bleeder and began to repair a torn vessel, I kept seeing his face from earlier, cold, unmoving, silent under the morgue's fluorescence. Now, under these same hands, he was warm again. Not fully alive, but not gone either. It felt like operating on a ghost. My pulse was fast, but my voice was calm as I gave orders. We stabilized his internal bleeding, restored blood volume, closed what could be closed. I worked with the discipline of muscle memory, but my mind wasn't in the room anymore. I kept thinking about what happens in those unmeasured spaces between heartbeats, in the silence where medicine can't reach. When it was over, his vitals were fragile but holding. Machines breathed for him. Medications kept his heart in rhythm. The others stepped back, still exchanging glances they wouldn't voice. I stripped off my gloves, feeling the tack of dried blood on my skin. Looking down at him, I knew the real mystery hadn't even begun yet. For the next 24 hours, Daniel Mercer lay in the ICU, unmoving. No family came, no friends called, no one claimed him. The nurse assigned to him told me she'd checked every possible database: driver's licenses, criminal records, missing persons, nothing. The fingerprint scanner read him as unidentified. The only name he had was the one written on his ankle tag. It's rare for someone to be truly untraceable in this age, but somehow he was. He had no past that we could find, no future we could predict. Later, I spoke to the paramedics who'd brought him in. Their memory of the call was fractured. One swore they'd found him at the accident scene, pinned inside the silver sedan. Another insisted he'd been on the road nearby, as if he'd been thrown from somewhere else. Neither could say for certain when his pulse had stopped, or if they'd even had a pulse to begin with. Security footage didn't help. Reviewing the ER cameras from that night, there was a gap 2 hours of nothing but static. The hospital's tech team blamed a glitch, but I'd worked there long enough to know those cameras rarely failed. Rumors began to spread. The ICU is a place where tragedy is routine, but this was different. The story of the dead man who came back ran through the night shift like electricity. Nurses spoke in hushed tones. Orderlies avoided his room. I dismissed it all in public. I told them what I tell medical students, that rare cases can look supernatural until you understand the science. But when I was alone, I couldn't shake it. I started keeping my own notes, more detailed than usual. I wrote down every fluctuation in his vitals, every twitch of muscle, every flicker on the monitors. It felt less like charting and more like keeping a journal of something I didn't want to forget. And somewhere, deep down, I wasn't just documenting a patient's condition. I was trying to find proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined the heartbeat in the morgue. I was woken by the kind of page no doctor forgets. A sharp vibration on the nightstand. The fluorescent glow of the clock 3:04 a.m. My name on the call sheet. My patient's room number. The man without a name. I was already moving before my mind caught up. The hallways at that hour have a strange pulse of their own, silent, yet brimming with the hum of machines and the distant shuffle of feet. As I approached the ICU, I could hear the clipped voices of the night team, the rising tempo of urgency. He was coding again. This time, there was no mystery in it, no miraculous surge of returning rhythm, no defiance against biology. His body lay slack, chest exposed, skin the pale hue I'd seen before, his pupils fixed and dilated, his heartbeat absent. We began. Compressions anyway. Adrenaline, atropine, repeated shocks, the choreography of desperation. My hands moved as they had countless times before, with the precision of training, yet my thoughts were far from the room. They wandered to that first night, the morgue, the moment his chest rose again like a tide refusing to ebb. The monitors, beeping, slowed, then stilled. A final flatline, pure, unbroken and cold. We stopped. The room fell into that peculiar silence that feels almost solid, as if grief has a weight. I told the nurse to mark the time of death. It was a formality, something my voice carried out even while the rest of me was still elsewhere, back in the place between the first and second death. This time, I felt no expectation of movement, no flicker of resistance from the man's body. It was absolute, undeniable, and yet, in the space behind my thoughts, something whispered, "Are you sure?" I stood there long after the others left, the flat green line etching itself into my memory. I wanted to believe in the ordinary heart failure, irreversible hypoxia, the linear march of cause and effect. But belief is fragile when it's already been broken once. That night, sleep refused me. I lay in the dark of my apartment, every detail replaying itself. The weight of his chest under my hands, the strange heat in his skin despite the cooling air of the ICU, the absence of an identity, fingerprints, no family, no history to anchor him in this world, and the sound, God, that sound of phantom flatline ringing in my ears. Not the sharp electronic note from the monitor, but a deeper, more resonant tone, as if some vast and invisible threshold had closed twice on the same soul when morning came. I dressed without thought, driven by something I could neither name nor justify. Medicine had taught me to catalogue, to record, to preserve facts, but this was slipping through my fingers, and somewhere deep down, I knew it would not let me go. 2 days later, security found me, not with accusations, not yet just a question that sat wrong from the first word. "Dr. Aboutanos, can you explain this?" It was footage from the ER the night the patient arrived, except there wasn't. 2 full hours missing, starting shortly before the supposed ambulance arrival. The feed jumped from one time stamp to another, clean as a scalpel cut. They'd checked for malfunctions, none found. They'd asked it, no trace of corruption. It was as if those hours had simply never existed. I requested the ambulance logs more, out of habit than hope. They were incomplete. Handwritten notations trailed off mid-sentence. No digital record of the route taken, no GPS signature from the paramedic unit. When I asked the crew who had brought him in, they hesitated. One insisted they'd picked him up after a roadside collapse. The other frowned, swearing they'd never seen him until he was already in the ER bay, the same patient, the same night. 2 entirely different recollections. I went back through the staff who'd been on shift. Some swore they'd seen me treating him in the trauma room before the code. Others looked at me as if I'd invented the memory, insisting their first glimpse of him was in the morgue after he'd been pronounced. The hospital is a place of routine, of meticulous record-keeping, where every movement has a timestamp and every dose a log entry. And yet here was a man whose presence was half a ghost in the system, visible from certain angles, absent from others. I felt the erosion begin, not of my sanity, though that thought crossed my mind, but of my certainty in the world's order. I had always believed the line between superstition and science was clear. Now it blurred like ink in water at night. The missing hours replayed themselves in my imagination. I pictured the ER hallway empty, the beds lined and waiting. Then a sound, soft, rhythmic, like distant footsteps. A shadow crossing where no one was meant to be. By the time the cameras returned, he was simply there. I started keeping my own notes. Not the clean, clinical entries of a patient chart, but a separate ledger hidden in my desk. Times, impressions, fragments of conversations. Because if the official record could vanish, I needed one that couldn't. It was no longer about treatment. It was about truth. And the truth was beginning to look stranger than the man who'd carried it into my hospital. There is a truth. They don't teach you in medical school that the human mind is built to hold a finite number of faces. The rest blur together, details dissolving into the fog of years. But some carve themselves into you like a scar you can't excise. I've carried the face of a girl who drowned in a winter river, her hair a crown of ice. The firefighter whose heart stopped twice in my hands, each time with a look of quiet defiance. And now, the man without a name, the man who crossed death's threshold and stepped back, only to return to it days later. I try to file him away. In one of the mental drawers I've built over the years, the survivors, the lost, the impossible. But he fits in none of them. His story keeps spilling into the cracks, seeping into dreams where the line between my hands and his heartbeat blurs. Every surgeon carries ghosts. We don't speak of it in corridors or at conferences, but they're there, lined up along the edge of the sterile table in our minds. We remember the ones we failed because they shaped the precision of our next attempt. We remember the ones who surprised us because they remind us we are not gods, only witnesses to something larger. But John Doe, he was neither failure nor miracle. In any clean sense of the word, he was a question. And questions, unlike corpses, do not rest in peace. I found myself one evening recounting the morgue incident to a colleague. I expected skepticism, a smirk, maybe even a gentle reminder that exhaustion plays tricks on memory. Instead, he just listened, his brow furrowing at each detail. When I finished, he said nothing for a long time. Then, with a quiet sigh, he told me of a case from his residency. A woman declared dead, who later opened her eyes on the autopsy table. No one could explain it. The official record never mentioned it. It made me realize something I had resisted. Medicine is not built to house the unexplainable. It is a cathedral of evidence, and anything without a clear altar of proof is left outside in the cold. We don't write it down because if we did, we would have to admit that control is an illusion, and yet, in the privacy of my own mind, I began to wonder if the limits of our knowledge are not failings, but boundaries meant to protect us from seeing too much. John Doe had no identity, no family, no place in the bureaucracy of the living, but in my thoughts, he became more present than many whose names I could recite. He was the embodiment of a truth I had always known but rarely faced, that between life and death, there is a corridor we do not understand. Some walk it willingly, others are dragged, and a rare few return from it with something we cannot measure, but we can feel. Months passed. The chaos of the ER swallowed me again. Cases piled on cases, the clock in my head ticking endlessly between incoming traumas and quiet lulls. I had learned to stop expecting closure. In surgery, most of the time, closure is a stitched wound, not an answered question. Then came the envelope. It was a Tuesday morning when hospital administration sent it to my office. plain white. My name typed in small black letters. No return address, just the seal of St. Augustine Memorial in the corner. Inside was the autopsy report for John Doe. I had almost convinced myself I didn't care about the result, that the mystery was better left untouched. But as I unfolded the single page, I knew I had been lying to myself. The report was brief. Cause of death, undetermined. No signs of toxins. No catastrophic injuries beyond the ones we'd treated. No anomalies in the heart tissue. No brain lesions. In short, nothing. It was as if death had simply chosen him again, without leaving a fingerprint. I read the page 3 times, searching for something between the lines. A word choice, a subtle indication that the pathologist had seen what I had seen. But it was sterile, clinical, the language of certainty where none existed. For a moment, I considered filing it away, letting it join the quiet pile of cases that fade with time. But as I sat there, the faintest memory stirred, the sound of the morgue, the echo of a sudden heartbeat in a room where no heartbeat should exist. Sometimes, the human body defies our knowledge. Sometimes, the human spirit defies death. I don't know which I witnessed that night. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But I know one thing with absolute certainty. I will never forget the rhythm I felt beneath my fingertips. The hospital has since moved on. Staff turnover, new protocols, new emergencies to pull focus. The morgue is still there, cold and unremarkable, its stainless steel walls holding other stories no one will tell. But for me, the corridors of St. Augustine Memorial are different. Now, I walk them with the awareness that somewhere just beyond the reach of medicine and reason, something waits late at night. When the ore is empty and the only sound is the hum of the overhead lights, I sometimes think I hear it again. A heartbeat. Slow, steady, defiant. And then, nothing. The absence is louder than the sound itself.